Hello and welcome to the ManMade podcast. I am your host, Andrew, and today we will be continuing our series on the great men from history. We will be looking at their example and finding those little nuggets and principles that we can pass into our own lives through their great work. Today we will be continuing the Great Men series by looking at the life of Raoul Wallenberg, or Wallenberg. The story of Raoul Wallenberg, for those who are even aware of his life, is shrouded in controversy and misinformation. Every side trying to skew the events of his life to leverage the favourable view. Because of this, everything, even his very motive, has been called into question. In so, knowing that the information could be heavily skewed, we will stick to the official and generally agreed story. As for all intents and purposes, the parts that we know to be true are the reasons why we argue about the rest. Raoul Gustav Wallenberg was born in 1912 to a prominent Swedish family. He was raised mainly by his mother and grandma because his father died shortly after he was born. Growing up, his paternal grandfather wished to make him a citizen of the world and arranged most of Raoul's schooling, as well as trips to foreign countries, encouraging him to become proficient in both languages and diplomacy. After Wallenberg finished high school and did the compulsory military service, he travelled to the US and majored in architecture, despite his family's wishes for him to become a banker. Once complete, however, he travelled back to Sweden in 1935, from where, through his grandfather, he got placements in South Africa and later Haifa, Israel. This was where he met Jews who had escaped the horrors to the West and whose stories deeply affected him. Fast forward to 1944, at the height of Hitler's final solution. The 31-year-old Raoul Wallenberg left Sweden and travelled to Budapest, Hungary. The War Refugee Board, established in the US earlier that year, had selected Wallenberg due to his outstanding skills and his burning desire to help the persecuted Jews. Once there, he wasted no time and set up a Swedish embassy near a major Jewish ghetto and hired 400 mainly Jewish staff to run it. Here is where his legacy truly began. He began to hand out thousands of passports called Schutz passes, or Swedish protection passes, which identified the owners as under Swedish protection, and so, as Swedish was a neutral party during the war, allowed them immunity to deportation. This prevented the Nazis from being able to dispatch them to one of the many death camps. He also set up a vast array of safe houses, where he instructed the inhabitants to fly the Swedish flag, identifying them as an extension of the Swedish embassy. And so, even just a little bit, keeping the Jews hiding there from harm. Through these efforts, and many others, it could be said that Wallenberg saved upwards of 100,000 Jews from extermination. So much so, that he even drew the attention of the SS official Adolf Eichmann, who, despite his wishes, couldn't just have Wallenberg executed, though it was said that he did threaten Wallenberg, stating that there could always be an accident. This didn't end up happening, however. That was until the Soviets arrived. In 1945, Soviet troops arrived in Budapest, and in a way, this ends today's tale, as when Wallenberg travelled 120 miles east to meet with Marshal Rodion Malanovsky for what could only be assumed to be charges of being an American spy. He, like so many others in Stalin's Russia, disappeared and was never seen again. The next chapter in this saga is surrounded by mystery, negligence, and conspiracy. There are many lessons that could be learned from this one period alone. Maybe at some point we can come back to it, and if not shine light on what happened, at least we can see what went wrong, very wrong, and work to not do likewise. The life of Wallenberg was truly a great testament to a man's iron will to do what was right. He identified an active willingness to cause suffering and put an end to it. He worked with a relatively small team and managed to save the lives of thousands. He was heralded as righteous among the nations by the nation of Israel, though to our knowledge he would never live to see it. Some of you might look at this and think, I could never do that. I could never sacrifice myself in that way. If so, good. It's good to be honest with ourselves and be able to accurately represent our own character in an as objective a way as possible. With that said, however, that's only half the story. In a short but interesting book, As a Man Thinketh, the author, James Allen, writes, "Circumstance does not make the man. It reveals him to himself." It is impossible for you to know what you are capable of until you've been pushed up to and beyond where you thought your limits were. It could be that you see need and freeze, unable to make the right call, like I did the night when I started this podcast. Or you can prepare yourself in mind and body so that when circumstance reveals who you really are, you are not ashamed of what you see. We do not all need to be heroes. As a matter of fact, no one should really try to become a hero. Rather, we should strive to be the best versions of ourselves that we can possibly be, and make our own little microcosm of the universe just that little bit a nicer place to be. Most of us will never have to make the decisions that Wallenberg did, and honestly, we should pray that we never have to. But when push came to shove, Wallenberg did not fall. He pushed back, and pushed back hard. I hope you found this episode of the ManMade podcast both encouraging and educational. This is a man whose legacy we can truly use as a strong building block in the foundation of our character as we build ourselves into men and women of tomorrow. Please do subscribe on YouTube or follow us on SoundCloud to keep up with all new releases, and follow at ManMade Podcast on Twitter for any announcements. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week with a new episode. See you then.